Good morning, South Africa and the world at large. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and this is the Daily Friend Show. Today I'm joined by Mr. Hermann Pretorius. Hermann, how are you doing?
Well, thanks. It's good to be this side of 12 o'clock because things are slightly, defrosting.
Indeed. And of course, Mr. Terence Corrigan. Terence, how are you doing, sir?
It's just freezing. I
Indeed.
generally prefer cold weather, but this year has been very trying.
Indeed. But I believe that the cold weather is probably coming to an end now. Who knows? And let me start off with a series of something from Twitter that one of our writers for the Daily Friend, Ivo Vector, tweeted out. And this is a internal message on a WhatsApp group sent by the EFF Central Command regarding a planned march by some of its own members to their HQ. So it reads as follows. EFF Joburg Region Ward 27. Title, Frivolous March to HQ. To all fighters and ground forces of Ward 27. It has come to our attention that there is a disorganized, brain-birded, anti-revolutionary group whose intentions are to portray our HQ as ineffectual. We hereby warn all members of Ward 27 and sympathizers to distance themselves from this fatuous, asinine, premature, and imbecilic move. Those who partake on their way back should cut their membership cards into pieces because they would have defined themselves outside the organization. And then in bold, leaders who are effective are leaders who are disciplined in their daily lives. Yours in revolution. Which is... anyway. Delightful.
It's standard for Twitter anyway.
Indeed. All right. I think I'm gonna sign off documents from now on with yours in revolution. It's a great greeting. Anyway,
just to say that was a WhatsApp message that was shared on Twitter. The stupidity can't be ascribed to Twitter alone.
And that's truly a frightening thought. But I don't know, these guys are not that disorganized. They can't get a march together. So obviously,
yes, I did also admit there were quite a few spelling mistakes in there. But who among us has not made spelling mistakes from time to time? Anyway, here is our first topic for today, and this is about our president Cyril Ramaphosa and the Zondo Commission report. So, of course, the Zondo Commission report has got there's an awful lot of stuff in there. I'm detailing the corruption of the Zuma years. And one of the things that our colleague Gabriel Krause has gone to great lengths to point out is that it also contains condemnation of cadre deployment and BE. So, as I'm sure some of our listeners are aware, the DA has taken the government to court, saying that cadre deployment is an unlawful and unconstitutional practice and therefore should not continue, should be declared illegal by the court. As part of Ramaphosa's opposition to this in court, he has stated quite clearly that the Zondo Commission's findings are not are just recommendations, and he doesn't agree that cadre deployment is unconstitutional or unlawful. Terence, what should we make of all this?
What should we make of all this? Look, I think it's entirely predictable on a number of levels. Ramaphosa is not the first one to have made comments like this. Gwede Mantashe very much out the gate was saying this. Ronald Amola has made similar comments. But those with long memories will remember that this is exactly the route that the ANC traveled with the Nkandla, with Thuli Madonsela's Nkandla report. That, these aren't binding, these are recommendations, they're suggestions, and we'll sort of deal with this. Now, Ramaphosa has assured us, as have a few other members of the ruling party, that the new look cadre deployment will be the cadre deployment that makes cadre deployment great again. So don't worry about that. He says that this was a worldwide thing, and well, maybe it is, but if one wants to use those comparators, remember that there are a number of countries in the world that still have capital punishment. That's not necessarily a recommendation. I think that this unfortunately kind of exposes the new dawn, if you like, for the hackish nonsense it was. That we just that neither President Ramaphosa personally nor his party, were willing to go beyond certain ideological lines, and one of them is the party will remain in control of the state and will continue to cast its net. Incidentally, he also commented that, oh, and this isn't just about the state. The ANC is also deploying its people to the private sector. So, if I suppose you can take solace in that those ministrations are not limited. But there it is. Not a reformer. This is in a sense the master key that has to be turned. You want a capable state. You need a professional, meritocratic state, and it's just not on the table.
So, Herman, a number of questions. Firstly, you had some more detail about what Ronald Lamola said about this specifically, but also the politics of this. So there's been an enormous amount of hype built up around the Zondo Commission, and now it's sort of the report is finally here. Took a while, but it's finally here, and a lot of people in the media said, "Oh, you see, now we're gonna see everything revealed." But when it comes to policy decisions, it seems like the president is just sort of rolling his eyes and saying, like, yes, whatever you say. And as Terence suggests, this is kind of how Nkandla was dealt with, and that was all largely ignored. So we've come to a situation now where this really feels like it could undermine Cyril's political standing with a lot of the kind of media commentators and such who have already begun to feel a bit shaky about him. What do you make of the politics of this?
Well, I do think that from the start, the Zondo Commission was more theatre than anything else, really, substantively. South Africa doesn't have a very great history with commissions of inquiry. If you think about the Seriti Commission that looked into the arms deal, that was, in the decade after the publication of its final findings, it was absolutely decimated until a few years ago. It was essentially rendered valueless by its inability to consider sufficient evidence. And that was, an investigation into the original sin of, as it were, of ANC governance. And from the start, I've been warning people and I think colleagues as well, warning people that, don't buy into the hype of the Zondo Commission. This is not a court. We haven't seen any substantive legal action arise from it. And in a weird way, it's smart political tactics from the ANC. A similar sort of approach allowed them to get away with the Nkandla, optics disaster. So why not just institute another sort of talk shop to get it out all in the open? And it is useful to get these things out in the open, because then if Nomvula Mokonyane is then, a story comes out about her receiving bribes, people say, oh, that's old news. It sort of lessens the political impact of many of these scandals without any real cost or consequence to it. So I must say, generally, it is good ANC political tactics. However, Ramaphosa's approval rating was riding high only a few months ago in the high 60s. And recently, we've got good reason to think that it's plummeted right down into the low 50s, upper 40s, probably on the back of the Pala nonsense, and now this as well. I had thought that the Zondo Commission heading towards 2024, the elections there, would be one of Ramaphosa's opportunities to show and tell the country that, look, he's actually doing something about corruption. Now, if he is going about this and undermining the effectiveness, the usefulness, the applicability, the relevance of the Zondo Commission, he really does himself and his party some political damage for the swing voter, whoever that might be in South Africa, by just negating what could have been portrayed by a smart political campaign as progress on the front of corruption. Clearly one of the massive issues that the ANC struggles with. So I do think that this will cost him even more of the sort of moderate non-ANC sympathy that he had outside of the party. But we shouldn't forget that Ramaphosa has always been more popular outside of his party than inside of his party, and that popularity has given him some political capital. If he's going to do stuff like this, then you are going to see him stretch beyond the point of trying to maintain some electoral credibility and be an electoral asset, while at the same time trying to keep an ANC that is, beyond any state of coherence in terms of moral integrity. He can't hold that together. This will tear him in two. So I do think that this is just the next blow to his reputation, and I doubt he'll recover.
One piece of pushback I just want to give is on Nkandla, where, of course, we didn't see proper consequences for it, but I do think that the ANC, it did a lot of damage, and they had to go through this whole process of trying to pin it all on Zuma and associating all the problems with Zuma and having selling this idea of a new dawn, precisely because that scandal had done so much damage to them.
But I think part of why it did was because the public protector has more teeth than a commission of inquiry, and especially in some of the earlier court cases on the powers of the public protector, essentially the Constitutional Court found rather unwisely that the public protector findings by this office has almost similar weight to a high court judgment. So I do think it was a different ball game, but it was a similar situation where you could get things out there without getting any real consequences. It's sort of a run past jail free card. It's not quite the same as in Nkandla, but I do think commissions of inquiry, at a stage during the early year of the Ramaphosa presidency, I really considered sending him a WhatsApp just asking, Mr. President, you can actually do other things rather than just executing commissions of inquiry. But it's a delaying tactic, and the chickens are coming home to roost in several ways. And I do think that the uselessness of this type of political theatre is just one of those chickens.
So, Terence, just as a final thing, we've said it before on the show, but I agree with Hermann for the most part that commissions of inquiry are really not that useful. And that being said, some of the things that Zondo did put in his report, particularly with regards to policy, like, for example, his criticism of cadre deployment and BE, are I think pretty powerful pieces of evidence that kind of need to be answered by the defenders of the state's policy. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I will defend Zondo on this. I think that he did a very thorough job. I think that he I think in a very real sense he put his own life on the line, and I mean that physically, because I think there's lots of people who would probably have been quite happy if something had happened to him. He's a very, very senior and respected legal personality. So whether this has legal teeth, and I say, Ramaphosa may be correct that this is not binding, and but that's a Weasley way out of it. Ramaphosa has put political capital into this, probably thinking that he could sort of walk away from it, and that I think harks back to a sense that the ANC will command people's loyalty come hell or high water. And I think that 10 years ago that may have been the case. I don't think it's the case now. I don't think that a comparison with the Seriti Commission is accurate, because I think that was just so transparently stage managed. We only prepared to talk to people, to talk about information people personally experienced, not the 100 containers of documents or whatever it was that people actually offer to go and sift through. So yeah, I think having used this as a delaying tactic, finding a judge who actually took it seriously, and having this enormously voluminous report that names a lot of people and gets into a great deal of detail about them, it's not something that you can just walk away from. So, I do think maybe in a legal sense you can. I imagine if that is possible, that you will. But I think the political damage will linger.
I think, Terence, you're right on that. But according to law, he is probably right. There is no enforceable recommendation in terms of the Zondo findings. But I do think part of why the Cyril Commission is appropriate to mention here is not as a comparison, but as just an illustrator that commissions of inquiry do not carry in South African politics the same weight as sort of proper quasi-judicial investigation should.
No. There I agree. Look, let's remember, the Zondo Commission was a creature of the last days of Jacob Zuma's incumbency. I think he was desperately trying to kick it into touch. 5 years down the line, it'll report, and then we can ignore it. I think the Farlam Commission was a very good example of that. But yeah, the outrage about Marikana died away, and it could then be ignored. I think people are just snaky mad about the theft and corruption, and you want to have this thing going on for 5 years when people actually gray-sward. This is what happens. You have a very, very offended country.
And I do think it is worth pointing out that if a government was serious about the matters looked into by Judge Zondo, as Terence rightly points out, with some integrity that is laudable. If the government was serious about that, every rand spent on the Zondo Commission could have been given to the National Prosecuting Authority. That's the problem here. This is my main concern with the political theatre of commissions of inquiry. You might get either a useless report like Sariti, you might actually get a good report like Zondo, but it's got very, very little force behind it. And for too long, I think especially the media have allowed the government to get away with this idea that it's taking action. Just look at the Zondo Commission, when the Zondo Commission is a very good excuse of proactive inaction.
It's fact finding, not sort of.
It cost us R1 billion, 4 years, and it was, in a sense, the spark for the July riots last year. So I think we as South Africans have paid a very steep price for this.
That's well worth remembering. All right, let us move on to our next topic, and this is an op-ed written by ANC's acting Secretary General and I think current Treasury General, Paul Mashatile. And it has one of the funniest headlines I think I've ever seen put onto his opinion piece. It read, "Recovery may be slow and imperceptible, but it is underway," that's really setting the bar low to start off with. But anyway, Paul Mashatile goes into this saying, South Africa's economy is facing a number of difficult headwinds, both global and domestic. Despite this, there are emerging signs that we are well placed to survive these and build a more robust, more prosperous, more equitable economy for our people. He goes on to say that he acknowledges that South Africans face some very difficult economic conditions over the last 2 years.
That's big.
He blames a lot of this on COVID, on supply chain problems. And he does, of course, mention things like electricity and inflation at home. However, he claims that there are green shoots of recovery for the economy, that we came back to the pre-pandemic levels much faster than expected, which I'm not sure how he comes to that conclusion. He claims that South Africa continues to invest attract large amounts of foreign investment. Says that the state is aggressively building infrastructure and is embarking on policy reform. And he identifies a number of key areas as places where the government is focusing its attention. He says these are a secure, affordable, and sustainable energy supply, a diverse mixture of energy sources, and a just transition to a low-carbon economy. Such an economy must guarantee energy security, protect jobs and livelihoods, and must not compromise our industrial development. An acceleration of the expanded infrastructure investment to provide services and unlock growth and employment-creating potential of our economy. And lastly, a need to use government and the private sector procurement more effectively to advance economic transformation and empowerment of Black people, women, youth, and people with disabilities. And he then goes on to say that South Africa's economy is not doomed. It has got a lot of potential. So Herman, what do you make of all this?
I mean, it's always useful when politicians, use phrases like "we're not doomed." It really does.
Don't worry, the economy is not doomed.
Yes, it's like, oh, I feel so undoomed. I mean, I'm so convinced that doom isn't in the vicinity. I do think that this is, it is very much the same old nonsense. You get no fundamental new ideas here. The idea of a economic transformation to empower Black people, women, youth, and people with disabilities, that's been a refrain of the ANC as long as I've had the ability to understand language. So I would say about 4 years. The expanded infrastructure expenditure that's been coming along, same thing. We heard similar promises from Zuma. I must say a new sort of flavor is the increasing prominence, I think, of carbon neutral green economy, which is part of a global buy-in into this type of ideology, which one can debate. But the long and short of it is, it's fascinating that every single indicator that Mashatile seeks to make perceptible from the imperceptible is at best intangible and or at worst intangible, and at best utterly random. The point of having in 2021 the largest trade surplus since 1987 really is neither here or there. This is sort of a buy-in into the Trumpian idea of global trade, that you must have a trade surplus, then you're in a good position. Part of the reason we had a trade surplus in 2001 is we exported more than we imported, simply because we were too poor to import things. We're not an attractive market, so we're not really strong on the importation game. So trying to rely on very, very weak arguments like that, I think just shows how tenuous the ANC's argument is. And they've been at this they've got a good story to tell. That was true up until about 10 years ago. I would say in 2011, 2012 is when things really, when the momentum of, I think, the preceding good economic policy and global circumstances started wearing off, and also the World Cup in 2010 perhaps boosted that positive socioeconomic policy consequences on a bit. But we're now quite clearly into a space where we've got the worst unemployment in the world. 3 out of every 4 young South Africans are unemployed. I mean, we can talk about green and we can talk about shoots, and we see both of those in South Africa, but I don't think we can talk about green shoots.
Terence, your thoughts?
Yeah, perceptible means to be sort of below the level of perception, cannot be noticed. But so you say this, it is quite a remarkable headline. Paul Mashatile, he's the ANC's Treasurer General, right?
Yes, and Acting Secretary General, I believe.
Okay, well, I think given the ANC's finances, he's probably not the best placed economic source. But South Africa has a great deal of potential, but it's being squandered because we have a state that does not understand its own limitations. That this is something I've been banging on about for close to 2 decades. The whole idea of South Africa as this mighty East Asian style developmental state, when it can't, when most municipalities can't balance their books, this is just not really an option. If we could concentrate on a few things like just good housekeeping, just basically, we don't even have to make the trains run on time. Just stop them from being stolen and vandalized. We'd be making some progress. But there's a sort of best in the West mentality. We need to use these things more efficiently. Do you have the capacity to do it efficiently? Because I'm not seeing much evidence of that. And the more qualifiers you put on this, the more difficult and distant it becomes.
It's a really good point. I mean, we obviously prefer a more sort of private-led state, not so much a state-centric view of developing the economy, but we can't even get to the sort of that point of the discussion because simply, can the state do these basic functions like protect law and order? As you say, Terence, it just doesn't exist.
Now, look, for those interested, I published my column in the Daily Friend today is about small businesses. I always find this an interesting topic because, on the one hand, you have the school of thought that sees small business not as business but as a kind of moral statement, that serves its communities or whatever. And then, well, that's kind of what got me started. But if we could simply take away some of the restraints, some of those policy choices that have been made that have made it difficult and impossible for small firms to operate, we would make some progress. And some of the comments under my piece, well, you don't talk about finance or whatever. No, well, there's a limit to what you can do in 2,500 words, which is about 3 times what the column's supposed to be. But one does what one can. I also didn't talk about empowerment policy, which is another problem all on its own. But yeah, if you're having to spend as much as 4 to 6 days, of an employee's time just filling in the forms and doing your compliance, that's a lot of time that you're not spending doing actual business stuff. So yeah, when people say we must pray for small businesses that they find ways to prosper and serve their communities, I say, well, the government's responsible for those communities, can stop trying to destroy them, and if we have more money, then they probably get along quite well. But that's
exactly
not the moralistic way of looking at it.
A very quick thing. I think the closest we come to any substance from Mashatile in terms of what could genuinely, in some reality, be positive development is the acceleration and expansion of infrastructure investment. There are economic models and circumstances in history where that has actually led to economic growth. The problem with those models is that they were implemented in circumstances where there was untapped purchasing power of the consumer within that country. You can put in place the necessary public infrastructure and you could hire the workers and so on, but that infrastructure would only make it possible for pent up capacity for the consumer to spend more and for businesses to bloom into the space created by the government through a Keynesian model, and that might work for certain trade-offs. We don't even have that here because, as Terence points out, we don't have a business sector able already, within the very strict limitations of law and regulation, to jump at the opportunities that improved infrastructure might offer. You can't open a new branch of your business in the next door that you can now reach via rail if you are haggled down in an inability to grow your business because the restrictions you currently experience is crippling any expansion, never mind based on new infrastructure. So I do think that the closest Mashatile comes to substance is still undermined by exactly the point that Terence made about just the oxygen sucked out of the air, out of the room.
Indeed. All right, let's very quickly move on to our last story. So we're going to have to cut it down a little bit. This is the discussion of nuclear power and how it's going in South Africa. And a guy called Hermann Winkler, who is a professor of physics at UJ, has written an article talking about the problems that Koeberg nuclear power station, which is South Africa's only nuclear power station, has had in upgrading itself, and that it is now way behind schedule. It has had a couple of malfunctions, and it has seen resignations and other staff problems. And he suggests that this shows that South Africa's plans to perhaps potentially develop more nuclear power stations, that the capacity doesn't exist. I'm not sure entirely if he's correct, but Hermann, what do you make of this?
Well, I do think that there is some merit to the industry of nuclear power is a very complex one, and it takes a high degree of sophistication in terms of infrastructure and support and just skills. And what frustrates me about this discussion, and especially in the context of Mashatile's remarks of sort of a carbon neutral economy, is South Africa created Sasol by essentially looking at what we had and what we didn't have and how we wanted to get what we didn't have with what we have. We have lost that sort of problem-based, problem-orientated thinking. We have enough resources on some of the existing technology while we develop this sort of more efficient, perhaps future technology. I get frustrated by this conversation about can nuclear work, can't it? Yes, it can, but with certain assumptions of skills and, of course, with some stability in the rest of the sector.
Terence?
Well, assuming that there's not going to be a sort of customary, 10% by the construction mafia and 10% by the the other mafias and 10% from the next crowd. Look, I remember actually speaking to a official at Treasury some years ago, and I asked him what he thought of the idea of nuclear expansion, and he said no. And I thought I was going to get, sort of a green argument because we can't afford it. And he said, there's no way we can afford that sort of commitment. I wonder if the guy's still at the National Treasury, but and I think that point made in that article was well taken. Get Kuba working for another 20 years, upgrade and renovate and rehabilitate and do whatever you have to do, because that's an asset we already have. Once again, it's about realizing the limits of possibilities.
Yes, no, exactly. Well said. I do think, though, that any new government coming in should definitely at least consider it a long-term goal to build more nuclear power plants, even if our capacity or our problems are not entirely solvable in the short term. But anyway, that's all the time we have for today. I just want to say that our events at irr.org.za email seems to have run into a bit of a problem. So in the meantime, if you guys are interested in sending us stuff about events, if you sent one to the events email and it got bounced back, please do send to sairrevents@gmail.com until we sort out the other one. But anyway, that's all the time we have for today. So thank you very much for watching, and we will see you tomorrow on the Daily Friend Show. Cheers.